is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And just like we thought, Ohio State went out and scored 34 points to begin the game against Oregon and destroyed them in the Rose Bowl. And we're here to talk about how smart and right we are in all things.
And I couldn't
Ohio State
enjoy
football.
any of it. I'm so mad.
That's
that
right.
Ohio
I'm so
State
angry.
won this game
That's
in
right.
spite of what I believed was going to happen. Because
That's
that's
right.
really what's most important here is
Just being right.
my feelings and predictions, and not the actual players involved.
So, I guess a small mea culpa is warranted. Both George and I believe that Ohio State was going to lose this game, but we're going to talk about that.
Crow never tasted so good.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll eat as much crow as people want me to eat, but I do want to emphasize that when I make a prediction against Ohio State, it's not with any amount of joy in my heart. I'm not excited about it. It's because I believe that that's what's going to happen. And I do think there's a certain subset of Ohio State fans and commenters and commentators and people who write and blah, 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 who genuinely want to see Ohio State lose so that Ryan Day will eventually get fired.
Yeah, I don't know if it's as much wanting to see Ohio State fail as much as it is specifically Ryan Day. That they hate Ryan Day more than they love Ohio State in this moment.
Correct. And I am not that. I know you're not that. When we say that we think Ohio State's going to lose, it's because we have specific football-related reasons to say that. Now, with that said, I don't think anyone on the planet, I don't care how confident you were in Ohio State's victory against Oregon, I don't think anyone on the planet believed that it was going to transpire the way that it actually did. So I got to say, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about, is there any Ohio State win that I can point to where I was this baffled, I guess, is what I would say. Because really, that bafflement, when Travion Henderson hit that 66-yard touchdown run to go up 31-0, that was, I think, the closest to an authentic feeling of utter bafflement and confusion that I've ever experienced watching football. And I'm like, what is the most recent comparable feeling that I had to that? And I had to go all the way back to 2014. When they played Wisconsin.
Exactly what I was thinking about during the game.
That's the closest thing to it. And even then, honestly, I could almost believe it in 2014 because I was like, it made sense. Ohio State was taking the ball or the top off of Wisconsin defense in a way that they had not done all season. Wisconsin was completely confused by that. And you're like, okay, that's crazy, but I get it. This is just Ohio State being so much better than their opponent from the snap, right? From the very first snap, that they just annihilated them. And I was baffled. I was utterly baffled. If someone is out there who says this is exactly what I expected, please explain to me why you thought that so that I may learn from you, because I don't think anyone could have possibly seen that coming.
Well, Ramsey, I think, did, but Ramsey's also the kind of guy that picks Ohio State.
I don't think Ramsey saw 34-0 to start the game. I understand he
would, in hindsight, he would tell you he did, but
maybe, maybe he did. I don't know, but I don't know, man.
He, credit to him. He thought it was going to be at least a 3-score win, and we don't make halftime scoring predictions. We just, they play 60 minutes for a reason.
That's
right.
It
was pretty close. I was at the 2014 game against Wisconsin, so that game lives very fondly in my memory. I got to go there with my dad. It was, I remember being at the Michigan game before that one, and the dead silence in Ohio Stadium when JT Barrett got hurt, and just the air getting let out of the stadium, that it's like, oh my God, we already had to overcome so much to get to this point, losing Braxton before the season even started. And it's like, we really have to go through this again. We're probably still going to end up beating Michigan, and that's great. But it's like, we had to save. So we've come so far from the Virginia Tech game, which if you go back in the lore of Ohio State 11 Warriors, you'll actually see Johnny Ginter predicted that Virginia Tech would beat Ohio State to the point of.
I'm really just coasting on that one accurate prediction, and now trying to parlay that into being a football Nostradamus and being pessimist all the time. That's really what I'm going for.
but we were they didn't really need to unleash Cardale Jones at the end of the Michigan game, so it was
No.
really a total wild card in terms of what can we expect. Like what would Ohio State really need to do to make enough of an impression to sneak into the college football playoff? Are they even going to beat Wisconsin? Let's see what happens. And I there was so much more wild card energy going into that game than there was with this when you compare the two performances. But in terms of just getting a dream sequence of a first half, it's the same thing. Not only because of the lopsided scoreline, but the way that every single touchdown was a big play.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, you really can't ask for anything more as a fan.
Right.
In terms of comparing those two, I mean, I'm going to be biased because I was literally there at the game, and I would like to say that I think it's still probably the most dominant performance Ohio State has ever had against
I
a ranked
actually,
team.
I think it's I think in terms of like in college football history, it's the most dominant performance by a betting underdog like ever. I seriously think
It's
that
got to
is.
be in a conference championship game.
Yeah, I mean, because they were like what, like six or I forget what the line was, but I
I
think they
don't
were
I
like
don't remember. I
I think they
wasn't
were like
paying
6 or 7
attention
point
that day.
dogs in that, and then they end up winning by obviously 59 points. So I'm pretty sure
And
it's the largest.
shutting them out.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't even
So
know if Wisconsin got past their own 50.
I don't think they did until like the very end of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think is the biggest win by a betting underdog in college football. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but I'm fairly sure that is actually the case.
It might be. I think in terms of pure production, I like trying to remove my own bias from wanting to say that I was there for the biggest one.
Sure.
I think the fact that the first half ended with a Joey Bosa scoop and score, a defensive touchdown,
Hmm.
and the fact that they shut them out completely as opposed to Oregon scoring right before they went into the locker room. I think on a pure production basis, you probably say that is still the most dominant, impressive performance Ohio State has had against a ranked opponent in recent memory, if not ever.
Yeah.
However, if you want to make the argument that it was what just happened in the Rose Bowl, given Oregon was undefeated and had beaten Ohio State previously this season,
Yeah.
I have absolutely no problem anointing it to that level too, because it was the exact same scenario in terms of nobody could have anticipated, regardless of whether you thought win or lose. 99% of people estimated that this was going to be a close game.
Right.
Nobody
Even
could have
even
anticipated
coming
Ohio
off of
State would
the
win the way they did.
even coming off the Tennessee game, right? Like people were like, okay, well, Ohio State's got it back. Even if you were feeling super confident about how the offense was being managed, all that kind of stuff, I because of how well Oregon had performed all season, really. I mean, yes, they had a slow start to the season. They looked vulnerable against Boise State, in the first couple weeks of the season. But after that, they just pretty much ran through the conference, win the conference championship pretty comfortably. Although I think Penn State pushed them a little bit more than maybe people expected. But in general, they had very few weaknesses going. Now, I will say, kind of to your point, Ohio State very, very close on this, right? Like the betting favorite, I think, going into the game.
Like 2.5 point favorites, yeah.
Right. And most of that I think was probably based on what happened against Tennessee. But my point is overall that Oregon was a very, very strong team. I do think they're going to have to reevaluate a lot of things about how this tournament, this college football playoff is structured in terms of seeding and things like that. But that doesn't really matter because Oregon was still going to have to play Ohio State at some point anyway, I think, given just the way everything's been structured. And if you think that these are the best two teams in the country, which I think a lot of people do, that was inevitable anyway. So I don't think that's really discussion for right now. I do want to talk a little bit about how we think it happened. Why did this happen? Aside from just the fact that, obviously Jeremiah Smith is incredible and Will Howard has been playing extremely well and all these other things. I do want to talk a little bit about why we think Ohio State was able to win 41. What was it? 41-21. How did that happen is something that I think will be informative for the next game against Texas a little bit. And I think it kind of starts a little bit before this game in the lead up to it, where Jeremiah Smith was talking about how if you got us one-on-one, right, we're taking a shot. And I almost feel like Dan Lanning took the bait. Like I know they didn't create their entire defensive game plan on the basis of one statement from one player in Ohio State, but if you watch the game, it really, really feels like they took the bait. Like they said, no way, man. We're going to match up with you guys. We've got athletes. We've got schemes. We'll be fine. We don't have to do something super crazy here. We just know that we're the better team and we're going to execute and do things.
You're just going to commit offensive pass interference.
That's right.
You can't actually beat us, Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah. And so I think ultimately what really happened in this game is they didn't really scheme to take away the biggest weapons that Ohio State had, and then, try to live or die based on like the running game or Will Howard doing the short to intermediate passing game. They said, no, we'll take our chances with Jeremiah Smith. And it obviously bit him in the ass immediately. And that was the crazy thing about it, because what Jeremiah Smith, if you get us one-on-one, we're going to throw. That's what they did. And it was completely successful. And after the first quarter and a half, that was it. Game was over. So I really think that was it. That they took the bait. They tried to play Ohio State straight up. And when you've got this version of this offense, I don't think you can do that. I think you have to do something completely different.
It definitely seems like Oregon got shell-shocked in a similar way to how Tennessee did, where you have these are two teams that go into the postseason in the top 10 that were not accustomed to being run off the field that quickly in that fashion. And, it did really, people called this a heavyweight matchup. It's funny if you were like to compare this to an actual heavyweight fight, whether in boxing or MMA or what have you. I know a lot of people have been comparing what Ohio State is right now to Mike Tyson. If you are an MMA aficionado, I would invite the comparison to the current somewhat interim heavyweight champion of the UFC, Tom Aspinall, who all of his wins on his way to winning the interim belt and hopefully facing John Jones sometime in the coming year have been, I'm just going to come out and we're going to trade and you're going to go down in the first 5 minutes. And that really is what it feels like Ohio State is right now, is in terms of throwing their weight around. Mm-hmm. They just recognize that we're not going to invite a close game. We're not going to entertain that notion. We're going to give you our best shot from the jump, and you're not going to be able to handle it if we connect. And in the last two games, they've been connecting. And the thing about me picking against Ohio State last week was, if this game is as close as pretty much everybody anticipates it's going to be, regardless of whether or not you think Ohio State is going to win, I can't feel good about Ryan Day managing the game in the dying moments when Ohio State has to win, regardless of whether they're ahead or regardless of whether they're trying to recapture the lead. Mm-hmm. Based on recent history against Oregon and Michigan under those circumstances, and even in previous circumstances in the CFP, such as against Georgia, I can't feel good about him putting the team in the best position to win if the game is close. The main reason that I'm all the way back in on them after this performance is that doesn't matter if you're just kicking the dog piss out of any opponent you're playing in the first 10 minutes of the game. Right. If you run them off the field immediately, you don't have to worry about making the right decisions when the game is close, because the game isn't going to be close. Yeah. And after they just did that to the team that most people picked to win the national championship, how can you not feel good about them doing the same thing to Texas and then again against Penn State or Notre Dame?
Well, and I think
they're in the driver's seat now. Right. They have to be.
And I think the point that you made about like not necessarily being confident that Ryan Day would do that, I mean, you saw it against Tennessee and you're like, okay, well, this is a guy who's essentially coaching for his job, right? And is this going to happen again? Are they going to be able to keep that same attitude against Oregon? And
I don't think he was necessarily coaching for his job as
no,
much
but
as if
no.
he lose another close game, there will be a lot of scrutiny. As long as they don't get run out of the stadium, I think that he probably would have been fine.
I agree, but my point is that was the attitude, right? Like that was the mentality that I think
among a lot of fans, I think it was.
Yeah. Right. And not, I don't think he actually would have been fired. I agree with you with that, but I'm saying like this was definitely a do or die kind of thing for Ryan Day when it comes to attitude and program management, all that kind of stuff. Like this is a big
that can't beat top 5 opponents narrative is totally dead after this game.
Oh, right? No, yeah. Well, yeah, that's done. And so I guess the question was, how much confidence do you have in Ryan Day to replicate the kind of performance that they had against Tennessee? And so that goes back to scheme, that goes back to approach. What are you going to try to do? How are you going to try to maximize the talent that you have on the field? I wasn't super confident that they were going to just keep letting it fly. And I do want to talk about one specific play. It was the first play of the game where I was like, okay, this is a team that not only are they trying to get the ball to the playmakers, but what they're doing is they're coming up with schemes and ideas to put defenses in conflict. And that's one of the things that I think I was most critical about Ohio State, especially after the Michigan game, but definitely towards the end of the season, where it's like, this is almost like a passive offense where we're going to react to what the defense is doing. We're going to try to find weak points. We're going to try to expose them, blah, blah, blah. But that's going to allow other teams, particularly teams with good defensive lines, maybe with good safeties or corners, to like really put pressure on Ohio State to try to like win these one-on-one matchups and whatnot. You need to put the defense in conflict. The first play of the game, they had 3 wide. So Quinshon Judkins was out along with a couple of wide receivers. And it looked like they were going to do one of those screen passes that they do where they throw out to the flat, 2 receivers block, the third one runs, and then you usually get 8 or 9 yards out of it. What they did with this is they sent G. Scott in motion across the line towards the bunch formation. And then they essentially gave Will Howard an option pass.
Out of the backfield,
out of the backfield, yes.
You don't see that very often.
No, you don't.
Tight end lining up in the running back spot.
Right, and what's hilarious about that is that Oregon's defense, when they saw that line, right, or when they saw that lineup, when they saw that organizational play call, right out from the gate, they're like, oh, we know what this is. And so they pressed up and they immediately crashed on Quinshon Judkins. And all G. Scott had to do was clip a guy, and then he had 10 yards in front of him, and that was it. And I was like, okay, now they're starting to put the defense in conflict. Now they're asking these safeties, these linebackers to make choices. That's a problem. And so now you get freaked out about that, and then Jeremiah Smith can just run past you for 50 yards. And so that's what I'm talking about. And it feels like this is now the philosophy that Ryan Day is going with. And they got to keep doing it. They got to keep doing it because this is the team at its best. And so I'm really excited about that. The offensive line played extremely well against a very good defensive line. Birch from Oregon got almost nothing. Donovan Jackson has done an incredible job at left tackle. They look, I mean, again, as good as they've ever looked against anybody under Ryan Day right now. Just the way that they're playing. I'm really impressed.
And not just Jackson, but I mean, nobody's talking about it, but Fryer had a had a pretty good game based on how much success they had running the ball off tackle and outside of the tackles, because they had almost no interior rushing success this game. And they recognized that, okay, that's not the part of the field that we're going to be able to attack if we want to be successful. Right. They started running to the outside, and that was ultimately where they got the long Travion Henderson touchdown from. I want to go back to, I can't remember if it was in the preview we did for the Oregon game or in the aftermath episode of the Dubcast, but I believe somebody during Ask Us Anything asked of us, how much of the playbook do you think we have seen from Ohio State at this point? And we gave different answers. You said that you thought we had seen pretty much like, I don't want to misquote the exact percentage you said, but I think you said something around like 90%.
Yeah.
Of
that sounds like
through
that
the first 5 or
at.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
You think that we had already seen most of what they were going to run out for the rest of the season. I offered up that I think that the consistent approach that that Ryan Day has demonstrated is that they're saving most of their sophisticated stuff for, if not the biggest games or the opponents that they respect the most, at least they know that when they get to the postseason, they want to have most of the stuff they want to beat their teams with not already on film.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel any differently about your estimation of based on what you just offered up? Because I don't think we've seen the motion Geese got out of the backfield in any other game this season.
No,
just to that
no,
example.
G Scott hasn't been much. No, that is not something we've seen a lot.
Do you feel differently now than you did in October in terms of how much they have left that we haven't seen yet that they want to unleash?
I mean, no, I don't feel that. However, I will also say that I think they added a lot. I don't think that these are things that were originally part of their plan going into the season. I don't think they added these wrinkles. I don't think they always had it in their back pocket. I think this is something that they realized they had to do. They had to change their approach in a lot of ways. I mean, we've talked about like the difference between zone blocking and gap blocking, right? Like that's a huge deal for the running game. And I think this game is actually really interesting in terms of that, because, Ohio State was pretty successful on the ground, but I'm actually more interested in Quinshon Judkins and what he was able to do, particularly in the second half, where he was still running at like 5-6 yards a clip because they had adjusted some of their schemes. And it's like, this is a team that put up 500 yards on the number one team in the country. And they didn't do it because they, were just doing slight wrinkles on things. They were doing it because I think they had a different philosophy in how they're approaching the offense. And it doesn't feel as passive as it had been. It definitely feels much more proactive, much more aggressive. And a lot of that starts with Will Howard. I mean, I think they trust him a lot more in some ways to do certain things that maybe they didn't trust him earlier in the year. But he's been unbelievable.
This is quietly maybe the most impressive job Ryan Day has done with a quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
Yet.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it ad nauseum towards the beginning of the season. Part of the reason I wanted to see Sayin so much was because I just frankly didn't really respect the arm talent that Will Howard had at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I trusted that he was going to play better than he did at Kansas State just because he was now operating with a better supporting cast than he ever could have had at his previous stop.
Mm-hmm.
But the eye test didn't lie to you that, like, even going back to Ohio State spring game, this was not a guy that could reliably throw the ball further than 15 yards down the field.
I mean, this is his fifth year as like basically a starting quarterback in college. He didn't throw over 60% he didn't complete over 60% of his passes until last year, and it was only 61%. And now he's throwing almost 73% of the time.
He had has the record across an entire career at Ohio State for games with 80% or more completion percentage. He's got insane. 7 now, including the Tennessee game.
Right.
CJ Stroud had 5 in 2 years. He's got 7 in 1 year of starting.
Right.
When he was at Kansas State, in 4 years, he completed more than 80% of his passes in games where he threw more than one passing attempt one time in 4 years.
It's crazy.
It's unbelievable. And great. He didn't complete 80% against Oregon, right, but he didn't need to. His deep ball in this game was more impressive and more lethal and more on point than, I mean, he's had good deep balls earlier this season, but the amount of deep balls in succession that he had in this game was nowhere close any other time during this campaign. He is really saving his best play for right now and showing out. And Day, like, people were giving him a lot of guff for McCord last year, and it's like, oh, you're somehow trying to discredit this guy that put Justin Fields and CJ Stroud, into the NFL. Especially in the case of Stroud, who was like, to go from a 4-star QB to the second overall pick in the draft, probably should have been the first. It's like, you're you're really going to slander the guy just because the following act, when really he probably should have been working with Ewers anyway, is, not quite measuring up. And then McCord goes to the ACC and sets the conference passing record his first year gone. And then he follows it up by turning this traditional Big 12 product who, prior to this season was really nothing more a quarterback other than like a wet dream for Urban Meyer in terms of like, this is a guy who I want to have run the ball 20 really plays per game.
That's really the funniest part. Like, he is Urban Meyer's like ideal version of a quarterback. Like, that's really the most funny part about that.
He's
he would have been Tim
JT
Tebow.
Barrett.
Yeah. He would have been Tim Tebow, JT Barrett under Urban Meyer, and he would have been running the ball 20 times a game.
There's no way that Urban is getting the kind of production through the air out of Howard that Ryan Day has brought forth this year. And he deserves a ton of credit for that I think will probably kind of start to realize itself as, we get away from this season in the coming months. I don't anticipate Will Howard is going to be some starting caliber NFL player, but for what they needed him to be this season, he is absolutely flown by expectations. Yeah, it's one of the most impressive things Day's done with a quarterback since he became head coach.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You know who else is definitely living up to expectations are the two defensive ends, for Ohio State, who had, we talked about them having to have games at the same time that were up to their caliber, where they both showed up. They both showed up. Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer both had 2 sacks apiece. Cody Simon had 2 sacks. Guess what? The team as a whole had 8 sacks
against the team. Best performance from the pass rush all season.
Yeah, against the team that had only given up 8, the team had 8 sacks in one game against a team that had only given up 13 sacks the entire season up to that point.
Coming off a game where the first time they played each other, they had no sacks against this team.
Yes. So again, I mean, we can make some of the same, I think, comments about how they changed their approach defensively, stunts, better time blitzes, more creative blitzes. The fact that Cody Simon has been as active as he's been, I mean, he's played really well all season, but I think he's another guy who has completely stepped up his game in the past 2, couple games here. They're all over the place, man. And say what you want about the offense or what, how they match up against Texas, the defense and whatever. I really think that the X factor, the determining factor about whether or not they win a national championship is, can this defense continue to do what they're doing? Because even if the offense falls off a little bit, I don't see any team having success against this defense right now as they're playing.
If ESPN isn't totally determined to make Ohio State or represent them as garbage, the most layup content opportunity they can do right now is have Nick Saban sit down and talk about what they did well in the pass rush in this game relative to the criticism that he offered towards Jim Knowles in terms of running a very vanilla, basic set of concepts the last time that they played, and compare and contrast what he did well. That coming from someone who was as vocal about it as Saban, I think would carry a lot of weight and be interesting to a lot of people, not just Ohio State fans.
Well, and the fact that you've got Caleb Downs
that would make Ohio State look good going into a game with an SEC opponent, so they obviously can't do that.
That's right. Well, it's Texas. Are they really SEC? Does that really count?
That's all they have to cling to.
I know.
It doesn't matter whether you consider them traditional or not. That's all they have left.
To make it count. Yeah. Caleb Downs, I think that's another angle to go to. Like, this guy has come in, and anybody who watches the film, I mean, you can't do anything in a 15-yard radius of that guy. Like, you can't run the ball, you can't pass the ball, you can't do anything. And
they didn't call his name a lot after he missed that early pick, but that, if you're a D, if it's kind of the same thing with offensive linemen, where if you're a DB, you're presumably having a great deal of success if they're not calling attention to you because the ball isn't going to that part of the field.
Exactly.
To that point, and I wish I had talked about it more in the lead up to the game, but I'm glad that I didn't, because I mean, this is really one of the main reasons why I didn't feel good about picking Ohio State, was that not a lot of people have been talking about the fact that Denzel Burke got spit roasted the first time that they played this team.
Yeah,
and I was really worried that Oregon was like, why would they go away from that when they
Yeah.
were able to, expose him so thoroughly in that game? And frankly, I mean, you could say what you want about Indiana's receiving core. I don't feel like they had really played another challenge that measures up to that standard the rest of Ohio State's season as Oregon's receiving core. So I was worried that, that there's no reason for them to not have an encore performance like that. I think Burke maybe got thrown at like once, which for a game where Oregon is playing from behind and needing to play catch up almost the entire time, that is unbelievable. That's as much of a night and day performance as the pass rush had.
And a lot of people, you know what I would say to that is, I think they wanted to. I think the problem is that the defensive backs for Ohio State were just playing so well. You saw tons of times any of the positive plays they got in passing from Dylan Gabriel were on rollouts, were on scrambles, basically when they had to like utilize play action or just Dylan Gabriel trying to make something out of nothing. Because any of the traditional dropback stuff that they did was going nowhere. They got nothing. He had to check down all game. And, it was, I was kind of following, their fans like in their message boards and whatnot on Twitter. And they were getting so angry. Like, why are we calling all these, 5-yard plays? And I'm like, that's all you got, dude. Like, they're not, you can't, Dylan Gabriel, if he passes the ball, knows he's going to get like 2 or 3 interceptions because of the way that the defensive backs for Ohio State are playing. And so, like, that kind of dominance, I mean, it's completely night and day from the first time that they played, both on the defensive line and the secondary. Linebackers played incredibly well. Right now they're just, I mean, I want to see what like guys like Kyle Jones and whatnot have to say about it, because it is so crazy to see the improvement. If you watch that first Oregon game to this Oregon game, it's just night and day. As far as what this means for Texas, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not betting against Ohio State. I'm not picking against Ohio State anymore. If you're superstitious and you want me to do it again, I'm not going to do it again.
No, I'm all the way back in after that game.
As am I. Now, Texas has the best defense Ohio State's played all season. They've got a Thorpe Award winner. They've got freshman of the year at linebacker. They have an incredible defensive line. They generate tons of turnovers. They're very, very, very good on defense. I think they have
But what great offenses have they played this season?
Not a ton. And so this is going to be a really interesting matchup because they have great players, but they haven't played great offenses. They should have lost to Arizona State. There was a blown call against them that I think Arizona State.
Oh my God. I could talk about that targeting situation for that deserves its own show. I mean,
if that's not targeting, I don't know what is targeting. I don't know.
I was disgusted.
Yeah.
Like I that was such an awful way to end what was such a great game.
Right.
And it felt so transparent. Like, and there were some people that were trying to save face with it, like saying like, oh, that was the refs being afraid to decide a game on target. It's like, what, you're afraid for the refs to enforce the rules correctly, right. Which is what their job is.
Literally their job.
That's it's not like it's not like an objective oh my God, how dare they get involved? No, that's a situation where you're supposed to get involved. And I'll be honest, like it wasn't called targeting on the field, and on the live, when it happened live, I just thought it was a great hit.
Yeah.
Even though it was definitely, a hospital ball situation from the quarterback.
Yeah.
I thought, it didn't look wrong to me. But then when they go to the replay and they start looking at it, you can
crown of the helmet
see from the reverse end zone,
the other dude's head.
Like, this is literally like, if they were going to have an off-season seminar about targeting, I would expect them to show a play like this.
Yeah.
There's no other explanation other than, and again, this is you and I just being the conspiracy nuts that we are, but how do you explain that away other than corruption? Other than Sankey making a call and saying you can't decide the game on this basis? I think again, it was clearly the wrong call. I mean, it took a long time too for them to review that. Like, way longer than I thought it was going to be. I think they were so afraid of getting pelted with trash from Texas fans that they're like, we haven't put. No, I don't know. I have no idea. It was garbage. But anyway, last thing I want to say about Texas real quick. Yes, defense is very, very good. Defense is very good. Offense, weird.
really weird. Their offensive line, they've got an injury on there, actually. I don't know if they expect, I think it says their right tackle they really like is going to be back. But their offensive line's really shaky. They are super bipolar in the running game. Like they only rushed for like 30 yards against Arizona State after rushing for like 300 yards against Clemson, but then only rushing for like 30 against Georgia. So I don't know what the hell they're going to do in the running game. Ewers is really inconsistent. Like he's shows flashes where he's the best quarterback in the country, and then he just makes incredibly terrible decisions or just overthrows a guy by 50 feet. And you're like, what the hell are you doing? I think it's going to be much closer. I don't think this is going to be a situation where Ohio State comes out and wins by 50 points in the first half. I do think they're going to win, but to me, this is one of those situations where they're going to have to like figure some things out as the game goes on. I do not expect Texas to have a ton of success against Ohio State's defense. I think they'll shut down their running game, and Quinn Ewers is going to be. He's not a mobile dude, and I think he's going to have some issues. But I do think it's close for a half before Ohio State kind of pulls away.
Another feather in the cap for Day, being the quarterback whisperer, is a prospect like Ewers, who came in basically being anointed the next Mahomes.
That's right.
From high school.
Yeah.
And left Ohio State to go to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And now in a position where he's either being looked at as going into the draft or being offered $6 million to hit the portal, regardless of what Texas does, just because Archie Manning is waiting in the wings.
Right.
If he does go pro, he's only projected to be the 5th quarterback off the board right now. Do you think that there's any scenario in which Day would have him in that position?
Oh God, no.
Like if he had stayed at Ohio State?
No, I feel like he would be the undisputed number 1 QB. I think that would be probably the situation.
I can't imagine he regrets leaving in any capacity.
No, I mean he's a Texas kid. Yeah, I mean,
but I do wonder if you were just like an objective fan of his, that you wanted to see him do well, that you didn't have any attachment to Ohio State or Texas, like. I don't know how you look at how his career has unfolded in college and not think how much better could he have been if he stayed at Ohio State. And I wonder how much that is going to be asked in wake of the result of this game if Texas loses.
Yeah.
Especially if it ends up being a romp. What's going to kind of put a pit in my stomach is if we get another fast start from Ohio State. And Ewers throws something like 2 picks in the first half, and Texas just says, "You know what? This is a Jalen Hurts to a Tagovailoa situation. We're going.
And then Archie comes in.
You're going to get us out of this, all right?" And then Arch just
leads the most epic comeback.
That's what I'm going to be terrified of that, man. There's something about backup quarterbacks in college that just totally weirds teams. It's like because you haven't really been
you haven't
anticipating or game planning for them.
Right.
I'm going to be very concerned about that. Even if Ohio State has another strong start, it's going to be just in the back of my head. Like, are they going to do Texas?
But by just enough to keep yours in the game so that it doesn't.
They have to do it in a they can't pour it on until late game when it's not going to matter. If they come out and are 3 scores ahead at half, I think there's too much of an incentive for Sark to just say, "All right, kid, writing's on the wall."
This is how
Ryan Day is in your head in the same way that Michigan is in Ryan Day's head, and we can't deal with it. The people talking about the OSU narrative here are correct. You're out. Arch, get in there and do right by us. Come on.
I'll tell you something. This is how like broken my brain is, and maybe this just is like fuel to the haters of Johnny Ginter. But until they scored that last touchdown to get over 40, I was like, oh God. What if Oregon does this? What if they?
I totally got it. I was going to make this point in our Slack, but ultimately I saw at Ohio State still they're not giving this game away, so I didn't want to talk about this. But the last game that I ever played in high school, we were or the last win rather, We were up. It was the first game of our playoffs in high school, and we were up 28-0 at halftime, and we got complacent. And while we got complacent with a 4-score lead up 28-0, the other team, who was from downstate Illinois, there's a lot of kids that like this is really all they got going for them.
Yeah.
Respectfully, like after this, it's like you're
respectfully, you live in the worst piece of crap, the biggest hellhole this side of the Mississippi.
I mean, it's a lot of kids that probably aren't going on to like university and stuff. It's like they're going to be working family business, whether that's farm or whatever, the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And so high school football is like even in a state like Illinois, where, you know, it's not nearly to the level of talent that a state like Ohio is. It's still, when you're in that rural part of America, it's a religious experience for the community. Those football games. And so a lot of those kids at halftime, when they're down 28-0, realize like, this is it for us. We got to leave it all out there because we got nothing left to play for. We won that game 28-26.
Dang.
We got outscored 26-0 after we scored 4 touchdowns on them in the first half.
So you were the Atlanta Falcons of
well, no, because we won.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
and we shut them out in the first half, respectfully.
That's true. That's true.
But I was thinking about that when I was watching this game, in terms of when you're a team that gets shell shocked and you don't have a moment to recover, and then you get that moment to recover. If you're a truly talented team, you are going to respond positive. Even if you don't end up winning, you are going to respond positively to that kind of adversity if you are a truly talented team. And that's what Oregon did. So it didn't. So I was thinking about that when they got the score to not get shut out at the end of the first half. Mm-hmm. And then when they scored again early in the third quarter, and I'm thinking, okay, they've, you know, absorbed the blow now. Are they going to be able to build on this? But Ohio State was able to keep them at bay and not totally keel over. So the momentum didn't totally swing the whole way. But my point is that kind of anxiety about, oh my God, what happens if this does, you know, take shape in the worst case scenario? It's not totally unfounded, because if you're a good team in that situation, you are going to respond and narrow the gap the way that Oregon did, even if they didn't come back to make it a truly competitive game.
Right. I mean, Oregon's a great team. They've got a lot of great players. I think Lanning's an excellent coach. They weren't going to just roll over and die, right, for Ohio State. So they were definitely going to fight back. But I was heartened by the fact that when Ohio State had to refocus, you know, put their foot back on the pedal again, they did that, right? They had that touchdown drive where they just kind of asserted their will and won the game. And defensively, I mean, again, like, it's not like Oregon all of a sudden was able to make everything work. It's just that Dylan Gabriel was able to string together some really crazy plays. And yes, you want to get off the field on third down, and yes, that's something you need to improve on, but like, it wasn't a scheme thing. It wasn't a talent thing. It was Dylan Gabriel just kind of like leaving it all out in the field. And that's great, but it's not consistent. And I think it doesn't really impact overall how I'd feel about the game. But like I said, with Texas, it's a whole different beast. I'm really interested to see how it plays out. I obviously think Ohio State's going to win. I'm not betting against this team after these past 2 games. But we'll see how it goes. So we've got more to talk about. We'll get a little bit into those.
Can we put a bow on it with this?
Yeah, do it.
What was your favorite play from the whole game?
I mean, probably like it was probably the Travion Henderson run, just because that was the point where my mind broke in half and I was like, what the hell am I looking at? Again, I can accept Ohio State.
There's something winning. So much more satisfying about big run touchdowns.
I think so too.
I think so too. Right. Touchdowns.
I think so too. Because on a passing touchdown, you're like, oh, somebody just got screwed up or somebody went wrong. But when you have those long rushes, it's like, this is one guy beating the entire rest of the team athletically. And it's really cool to see. So,
especially because like to your point, when you've got a touchdown like that, you know, the quarterback, unless it's like some weird end around situation where they're able to like get upfield, they can't block for you. And so you're going to have to usually make at least one guy miss.
Yeah.
When he got to the edge on that run, I mean, I had to replay this like maybe a dozen times. He made this one cut adjustment, like while still picking up speed
Yeah.
that the Oregon defender just couldn't deal with. That I wasn't even convinced he was going to be able to house call, just because it feels like we've seen so many Ohio State running backs in recent years that haven't been able to finish those long plays for touchdowns. Like J.K. Dobbins is the most obvious example,
Yeah.
but he
Slightly shorter
like
legs. Yeah.
when he was able to, like, I mean, once he got to the edge and was just out sprinting and thinking about how much bad luck he has had health wise in recent seasons, is like this is the Travion Henderson that we imagined he could be at Ohio State when he
Right.
was coming in as a 5-star running back. And I just it felt like the fulfillment of that guy's career and all the work that he has put in. And it, even if it came in a situation where they were already up by 3-4 scores, it made me so happy to see him have that moment in a game like that.
Well, and I think it says, I mean, the fact that he has been able to split carries with Judkins, and I think that has benefited both of them enormously over the course of the season. I don't know. I mean, you watch Scabado and he's trying to, like,
Scatabo.
Oh my God.
You keep calling him Scabado.
Scabado. Scadaboo.
Scabadabadoo.
Scabadabadoo. Look. He's not in the playoffs anymore. Doesn't matter if I pronounce his name correct. No, but my point is, you watch that dude put his team on his back, and he's throwing up on the sidelines, and he's clearly hurt, and you're like, wow, that's an incredible performance. But then you're watching Ohio State's running backs and going, these guys look like it's the first game of the year. They look incredibly fresh and well rested, and they're not. The hands aren't on their hips. They're looking great, and it's because they've been able to split those carries all season.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's a huge point for Ohio State in terms of, like, trying to get their way through a giant tournament like this, where you have running backs that don't have 2 or 3 games worth of extra carries on their backs and on their legs, really. So I think that's a big deal.
It's the same thing with what David Montgomery has done for Jahmyr Gibbs on the Lions this season in the NFL, in terms of having that pair that you can lean on for delegating the work so that both of them can be the most successful versions of themselves. And I'm sure he's so grateful to have somebody like Judkins there that's at that level where they 100%. Can lean on him as the knuckles guy. The last thing I want to say, because I know we're, this is going to be like almost an hour before we actually get to ask us anything.
I know.
But the last thing I got to say, because I feel like not enough people have talked about this coming out of the game. Did Emeka Egbuka make the best play from an Ohio State receiver in this game?
Oh my God. Where he had to, like, catch it after it was tipped, and he's, like, running into the end zone. It was unbelievable.
As much of a freak as Jeremiah Smith was in this game, he didn't make any play like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all people are talking about after this game is, this is the next guy for Ohio State. And this is like, and it's like, poor Egbuka has played second fiddle his entire career at Ohio State.
True, yeah.
And then he finally presumably gets to be the 1A this year, already gets surpassed by Jeremiah Smith. And he makes the best play by a receiver in this game in terms of difficulty.
Yeah.
And doesn't even get acknowledged or appreciated for it, just because Ohio State's already blowing out the other team. Well, and his teammate is just going off and setting a freshman receiving record.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I mean, it's weird because Emeka would be the best receiver on almost every other team in the country, right? Like, literally every other team in the country would have him as their number 1 receiver. And because you've got this insane alien right on the other side of the field, it's like, oh crap. But you know what? He's still getting his. Like, it's not, I mean, I do think people need to talk about it, but I do
he
like
deserves
that.
More is my point.
Yeah, well, no, I don't
Even if he is getting his, he deserves more than that.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. All right, so we've gone on real long. When you ask us anything, we were going to talk briefly about some of the other games.
This game deserved it, man.
It did. It was incredible. So let's go ahead and do that. Before we talk about our questions, let's talk about our dry goods store. The dry goods store at 11warriors.com, drygoods.11warriors.com, shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. It's snowing currently in Columbus, Ohio, which means you should get one of our fantastic winter hats. Let's do Ask Us Anything. You can ask us anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com. And I promise we're not pushing through this, so I don't have to dwell on all of the questions about how stupid I am. We'll start with Kevin. Did you have duck for dinner on New Year's Day? I did not, although I do enjoy duck. I don't know if you've ever had a good roast duck, but there's Lindy's up here in Columbus makes an excellent duck.
I didn't have it until I went to Hong Kong in 2014, and I happened to be there during there's some kind of they have a duck boat festival in June, and so I was there from May to June, and so in June, the whole town you can get duck basically anywhere, and it's all good. And so I finally had duck while I was over there. I was like, oh, this is pretty good. This ain't no gamey bird. It's delicious. This is pretty decent. I could eat this a lot. So every time I've had duck, it's been a good experience. I probably, if it was more immediately accessible, I would probably have it more often. It's pretty good. But I didn't eat it after this game.
Yeah. Maybe that's what I should do next year is eat the mascot of every team that I stay or some equivalent. This one's from
Good luck
Jay.
getting Wolverine.
Yeah, that might be a little bit difficult in some of them. This is from Jay, who kind of talks about a tiered model for college football. So in Spanish soccer, the best teams are in first tier, worst teams are at second or third. And so this is kind of like the EPL model where you've got
relegation table thing.
Exactly, right. And so he was wondering if you could do something like that in FBS, divide the groups out of 40-ish teams, regardless of conference. It would allow for better non-conference schedules and so on. Here's the thing I'll say about that. I personally don't think it's a bad idea at all. I think the problem is that because of the way that conferences are structured and the way specifically media contracts are structured, you could never do that. Northwestern gets the same amount of money as Ohio State from the Big Ten's media contract. Purdue gets the same amount of money. You wouldn't have to completely restructure every single media contract to allow for that, because no team is going to willingly sacrifice the millions of dollars that they're going to get from television contracts, from other media things, because to hopefully participate in the top tier or whatever that might hypothetically make more money. So that's really the biggest stumbling block here. I think it would be interesting, but it's never ever going to happen.
I think it was Gus Johnson in one of the bowl games earlier this week that made the point that if there was something that college football was going to borrow from the world of professional soccer, it would be interesting to see if they adopted a similar model of transfer fees to what soccer has, relative to trying to kind of mitigate the talent drain that is taking place, the vampirism with these G5 and lower caliber schools that are going to lose a lot of the great talent that they had to Power 5 programs. If you were able to have the schools acquiring them give them back some kind of funding that they would be able to presumably put forth entirely towards NIL for the sake of replacing that talent, I think that would be a good way to kind of make people feel better about the current environment that we live in. Obviously, the biggest players in the sport aren't going to want a model like that, so they'll probably do everything they can to avoid that happening. But in the interest of borrowing concepts from soccer to try to improve the palatability of the current climate of the sport, that is something that I think I would like to see adopted in some sort of format.
I mean, it's the Wild West right now. I mean, they may try anything. This is from our good friend Alvin. Happy New Year. So does Ryan Day just have a Michigan problem? I don't know. Maybe. I mean,
he does until he doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. He definitely has a Michigan problem. Does he just have a Michigan problem? I don't know.
We're not we try to be reasonable. We try to set reasonable expectations, which is why we thought Ohio State was going to lose. Yeah. Okay. Do we get to enjoy them winning as much as somebody that outright thought that they were going to win and never lost faith or the benefit of the doubt in Ryan Day? Realistically, no. But again, we're not operating from the stance that it's like, oh, I'm so upset that what I thought was going to happen didn't actually play out and that I thought I was right. But there is a whole contingent of this fan base right now that hates Ryan Day more than they love Ohio State. And that says something a lot about those people. At the same time, I mean, we were coming. I had lost the benefit. I still don't have the benefit of the doubt for Ryan Day in close games. A lot of because of what happened in the most recent result against Michigan. And as great as the last 2 games have been, as time goes on and they continue to beat the best teams in the sport like that, it only makes what happened in the most recent game against Michigan more inexplicable and unacceptable.
Absolutely.
And you cannot deny that regardless of how unwavering your optimism has been for this team.
Yeah.
That is something that needed to be rectified before the game this year. And even if this team goes on to win the national title, there's still going to be a part of me in the back of my head that is like, even though I feel comfortable showing my face again in public as an Ohio State fan right now, which wasn't true a month ago.
Sure.
I am not going to feel all the way back until that wrong is righted, especially because I thought it was a sure thing this year and it just didn't take place.
Well, and
Ryan Day's got to get that done. It just, there's no other way to negotiate it.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is from Bryant. So hi, George, and that dirty Oregon picking traitor Johnny Ginter. Hang on a second. How does George get?
I love this.
How does George able to duck, pun intended,
because they recognize that I come from a perch of knowledge and experience. And
I'm just a hater. That's right.
Well, you just go off of vibes, which explains how our bull picks worked out.
Yeah, I forgot to. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second.
I'm just kidding. That's ridiculous that you get slandered as much as you. I think it's just because you've been with the site longer. More people know who you are. I fly under the radar.
You know what?
Like we don't care what George thinks.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's okay. People can hate. I didn't realize till I saw the stats during the Oregon game, but apparently Ohio State opponents don't get called for holding ever. Apparently Ohio State's opponents have not been called for holding since the first quarter against Marshall in September. That's true.
Yep.
The last time Jack Sawyer drew a holding call was September 18th, 2021, which is true.
That's 2021?
Correct. Yeah, 51
That's
games ago.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Tony Gerdeman had that out on Twitter. That is true. That is a real fact.
That's correct. I thought they were saying September earlier this year, but that's unfathomable.
Yeah, the last time an Ohio State defensive lineman drew a holding call was November 4th, 2023. That's all insane. And he wants to know why that is. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think generally good teams get called for holding less than bad teams just because it's, I don't know, maybe the refs just see it in a different way. But this is a little beyond that. I think maybe they have to sell it a little bit more. I honestly have no idea, because that to me is just so inexplicable, especially when you have guys like Tuimoau and Sawyer on the end. It's ridiculous that they're not getting called for more.
It's dumbfounding. And I will, like, conventional knowledge tells you that there's a long held sentiment in football that there's holding on every play.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just a matter of, how egregious is it? Typically, if you're a lineman and you are able to get your hand placement, like, under the armpits and the shoulder pads, even if you're holding on for dear life, you're gripping it like a steering wheel, they're going to let that go, because that's a win for an offensive lineman.
Oh, sure.
In a run blocking or a pass blocking scenario, if you've got your feet in front of the guy and you're driving them like a steering wheel, that's a win. And they got to let you get away with that. Otherwise, blocking, especially at this level, would be incredibly difficult. Now, most defensive linemen worth their weight in salt are not going to let you get your hand placement in that area. So it's, kind of a moot point relative to this discussion, but that's just to sell the point that you can understand there's a level of subjectivity to these holding calls. It is unbelievable that it is gone, that this drought has taken place. I don't want to outright say there's a bias against Ohio State relative to the officiating, because, I mean, if you make that your brand as a fan base, then you're never going to hear the end of it. And plenty of fans already do anyway. And that's something that I've dealt with since I was in high school, even in terms of complaining about, calls that Ohio State gets or that the teams that I support get or whatever, that I can't objectively look at officiating correctly. But this is a trend, especially given a lot of like things that we saw during the Oregon game, that you can't, the Rose Bowl, not necessarily the first matchup, that you just can't help but look at it and wonder, like, they have to be looking at these matchups, given these are the areas of the field where you would think it happens the most. How are they just letting every single
and
thing go?
There were a ton of egregious holds during that game too, where
there
it wasn't
bad ones.
There were some really, really bad, including on one of Oregon's touchdowns. It was pretty ridiculous. So
which even Kirk Herbstreit was quick to point out on the replay that it happened.
Right. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if that changes in the Texas game. I don't. We'll see.
I can't imagine it does, but you know what?
Either.
If you're a player, if you let that bother you while it's going on, then that's only going to affect your performance negatively. Yeah. The fact that they've been able to battle through that, especially with the amount they just, pass rush just had its best game of the season.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they were able to overcome that and turn into the result that they did, it speaks to the fact that regardless of whether they get these calls or not, they're not going to let it bother them. And that's an important thing for a team that wants to win a championship to have. So credit to them for battling through that.
Agreed. This is another one from a good friend, Alvin. What's worse, Fowler calling us Crimson or Herbie not knowing the lyrics to Carmen Ohio? I don't know.
What?
I think
I didn't know that.
No. I think Alvin's exaggerating. Herbie, they had a little bit of cross. I think they had some crosstalk towards the end of the game, and Herbie was starting to do a little Carmen Ohio, and Fowler was like, no, like, no, we're not doing that, because they were broadcasting Carmen Ohio, right? Like,
okay, all right.
And I think people got their wires mixed up a little bit, because I went back and rewatched it, and I don't think Herbie didn't know the lyrics or anything like that.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. But
I'm not out here trying to defend Herbstreit, because he's obviously said some really stupid crap.
Right.
But that, on that particular note, I am not. Yeah, I think it's a little. But Fowler saying that it's a Crimson way, I'm like,
oh my god, that bothered me so much. It bothered me way more than it should have. But it's just like, God, you
it's the one thing you have to get right. Like, come on, man. Like, it's not Crimson.
Are you really that in bed with the SEC, ESPN? It's like, it should be a Crimson Avalanche. Alabama should be in the playoff.
That's right.
Come on.
Oh, yeah, it's like, dude, you got one thing to get right in that situation. Bryant, you sent another one. We're actually going to keep that in our back pocket until next week in the interest of time. This is last one's from Jen. Since the majority of Lone Warriors staff's college football brackets are busted in spectacular fashion, any chance to run an article with new predictions on the remainder of the games? Probably not. And speaking of predictions, I do want to slide this in. We did our whole bowl tally, and George, you have won that. What was the final margin?
I believe it was
you were 18 of 16, and I was 15 of 9. 15
that's
and 19.
Right. So, I mean, not terribly off from 50-50 for both of us, which when you're going off of pure vibes is, to be expected.
It's like they say, when you're right 52% of the time, you're wrong 48% of the time. So that's And also Jen wants to know, what's the best movie or show you watched in 2024? I saw Hulu had this show. I guess it was Fox or FX or whatever. It's called Say Nothing. It's based on the nonfiction book by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is one of the best books I've read in a couple years. It's about like the troubles in Ireland and whatnot. It's an excellent show. I think it's a better book, but it's an excellent show. And if people haven't watched it, they should definitely check it out. It's really good.
I didn't really watch any stuff that came out during the year. And I mean, there was, I guess, some stuff that people enjoyed, but I thought it was kind of a down year for media in general.
Yeah.
Music, video, music, movies. I made the joke to you during one of our off-camera discussions about how it speaks to the state of the video game industry that the Elden Ring DLC was nominated for Game of the Year. I don't know how many other DLCs have been nominated for that.
Right.
So I don't think I actually I think I did go to the theater maybe once to see something, but I can't even remember off the cuff like what it was that I saw. I
My
will
wife saw
say
Twisters. It was fine.
what I did watch last year for I tried watching it when it was debuting when I was in college, and I said I have Vince Gilligan overload right now, and I'm not gonna
That's
I'll put
right.
this on the back burner and
Sisterhood of the
maybe save it
Traveling
for another
Pants.
time. I watched one of Johnny's favorite shows, Better Call Saul.
There you go, all the way through.
And I enjoyed it very, very much. It wasn't
great.
quite what I expected it to be. I kind of wanted it to be a little bit of like an episodic sitcom thing where it's like, oh, what wacky client is going to walk in this episode that
Right.
Saul's
Right.
going to have to deal with, and it was
Right.
certainly more of an arc thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not big on arcs. I kind of wish more shows would do the episodic format, but you just don't see them anymore because
It's not
easier
prestige
to binge
television.
watch, and it's easier to binge watch an arc, I
That's
guess,
right.
than it is stuff that comes in 30-minute or hour-long increments. But Better Call Saul was excellent. It was great. So even though it didn't come out last year necessarily, it did, I think, wrap up the year prior, I think was the last season.
Mhm.
So it had finished very recently. And so I said, okay, now that the whole show is available, I'll give it a shot after
There you
putting
go.
it on the back burner almost 10
It's
years ago.
excellent.
And
If
I would
people
highly
haven't watched
recommend
it,
it.
you got to check it out. All right, so that's Ask Us Anything. Thank you for sending those questions. Dubcast at 11warriors.com. Let's wrap it up. But first of all, we talked a little about Arizona State against Texas. Totally got screwed. On the other hand, stop Texas on like 4th and 30 and you win the game. So I don't know. I mean, it's still on them a little bit.
Don't blitz on 4th and 13.
Yeah.
Play the sticks. This is
That
like
was insane.
it's the thing that drove me nuts about Jim Knowles his first year at Ohio State.
Right.
And then it happened again during the Oregon game.
Yeah.
Like they were the last touchdown Oregon scored, it was like 3rd and a mile.
Yeah.
This was
Defend the
after they
sticks.
got the penalty for the illegal forward pass.
Mhm.
And it's like, great, just play the sticks and you'll get them off the field.
Right.
And then this was the play that Herbstreit identified the holding on.
Right.
But part of the reason they were
You didn't need to
holding,
blitz.
yeah, part of the reason they were holding to begin with is because Ohio State sent like 6 people
Yeah.
to rush.
Not
It's like, just
necessary.
play the sticks and you won't give up. You won't get beat over the top in that situation. Why do they do this? And then the next drive, they made up for it. Knowles said, we're going to drop 7, spy
That's right.
1,
That's
rush
right.
3,
That's
and
right.
they got a sack for it. I'm
That's
like,
right.
just do this every time on 3rd and long. This is the only defense I ever want to see on 3rd and long. Don't
There you
ever
go.
blitz for any reason. So
So
credit to Knowles for doing
Arizona
that.
State screwed it up. They didn't listen to George. They lost the game. Penn State smashed Boise. I mean, not a shock. I mean, I know a lot of people.
It was closer than the final score indicated.
It was
but Boise
slightly
gave
closer.
they gave that game away in a lot of respects.
They did,
in terms
but honestly,
of lack of execution and decision making.
But here's the thing, man. Like a lot of people were saying, like, "Oh, I can't believe Travis Hunter got this over Genty." You know, he won the Heisman. Genty hadn't run against a team like Penn State. Like he was playing against crappy defense. Now, again, not to take anything away from his insane season, he had an incredible season.
Well, in contrast, what kind of offensive line was he really running behind then? Because that was what showed up in the beginning part of that game.
That's true.
Was
They
the
got
difference in trench talent.
But my point is, if Genty wanted to come out and make a statement and say, "I should have gotten this Heisman," that's when you do it. And instead, he ran
for like 190 yards against Oregon.
Yeah, okay, that was how many months ago? Like you have to like put your foot down in the biggest moment and say, "I'm going to win this game for my team," and instead he kind of laid a big fat egg, especially in the first half when he had.
How did Travis Hunter do in the college football playoff?
He did great.
Travis Hunter, who's having the presumed number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, throwing to him. Where's Colorado? Where's prime time?
He can't win the games all by himself.
But Genty's supposed to.
Yeah, when you're getting 40 carries a game.
Okay.
Yeah. When you're getting 40 carries, you can do. How many yards did Genty have in the first half? Like 10? 12?
It wasn't a lot.
It was bad. He could have done. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man. Like if you talk about a game where Boise State was in it, that might have made the difference. Notre Dame handled Georgia. Not a huge shock by that. Although I did like the fact that Georgia kept screwing it up over and over. Like just
I have to say, I I went to a bar to watch that game, and I went to the restroom right before the second half kickoff happened. And when I came out, they were showing all these like negatively framed things of Gunnar Stockton that I had assumed he threw a pick six. And I didn't realize until the next day that it was actually a kick return for a touchdown.
No. I mean, Georgia never impressed me all season, and I'm not at all surprised. I actually said Notre Dame was going to be a spoiler in a lot of ways.
I picked Notre Dame to go to the title game.
Yeah, I think that's completely
I still
fair.
think that's going to happen.
I do too. And
Big game James ain't beat nobody.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, again, the funniest possible outcome is Penn State getting to a national title with James Franklin, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Notre Dame's going to take care of business there.
Would you be more concerned with Notre Dame than Penn State?
I think it'd be about equal for both.
Really?
Both teams are kind of, I mean, they're definitely a tier.
But if Ohio State beats Texas, which one would you rather play?
I mean, Penn State, just because of their coach.
Okay.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
I'm 100% agree.
Yeah. Couple other things here. Men's basketball fell to Sparty, so I don't know. Is that an moment?
I can't believe it's interesting because they were technically favored, but this is something that you see a lot across sports in the early parts of most seasons when, before people that are sharp are actually paying attention, or at least before they've actually gotten a read on who's good and who isn't, is that people tend to overvalue home court advantage.
Yeah.
And it's reflected in especially a lot of the value that sportsbooks put on these teams.
Well,
but it's true in football too.
Yeah, and Ohio State's home court advantage at the shot is like essentially
non-existent. Oh, it's even more true in their case because of the shot.
Exactly.
So I don't think they shouldn't have been favored to win that game.
No.
I'm not willing to say, the long night of January that was under Holtman is persisting through.
I'll give them a few more games before I get into that. I think.
Yeah, what was frustrating about this game was that they got into the bonus with 12 minutes left in the second half, and you're like, that's
3 points. Let's go.
That's barbecue chicken. That's
right.
And they shot, I think, 2 free throws from there until the last 2 minutes of the game. Yeah. They drew maybe 2 fouls, and they went 8 minutes, I think, at one point without actually even drawing one. So it's like now, to their credit, that means they didn't need the bonus at all to close the gap when it became 13 points wide or something.
They
got themselves back into their game without it.
But,
a good way to keep a lead after you recapture it.
That's right.
Is to go live at the charity stripe.
That's right, exactly.
And they had a terrible free throw shooting performance against Indiana State, even though they scored over 100 points.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the trend that I'm most concerned with this team right now, is that you want to be a great team, especially a team that has any hope of succeeding in the NCAA tournament, you got to make your free throws. And they're not doing it right now.
Yeah.
And I hope that they find a way to mitigate that.
Well, Bruce Thornton's just going to score 30 plus every night, and it's fine. It's not
and Thornton had a miserable game.
He did, yeah.
Even though he got hurt a little bit. I mean, coming off of back-to-back 30-point showings, it was not good. So I don't not willing to write them off because of this performance, but it was definitely it definitely kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Just in terms, it was frustrating how they could have won and just kind of let it get away from them.
Agreed.
But hopefully, I'm reasonably optimistic they can work out what went wrong and bounce back. I don't know if they're going to beat Michigan State on the road, but this certainly wasn't as discouraging as the results that they had against like Texas A&M and Auburn by any means.
A couple other items of
By the way, Holtman lost by 44 points.
That's right, he did. So. I knew you were going to put that in there.
Oh, we had to. It's like, they finally play a team with a pulse, and look what happens.
Well, no, he's coming off. It's January, baby. Like, you can't not do that. It doesn't matter where he's at. Ohio State's Michael Adedokin won the Heisman Trophy of soccer, men's soccer. That's pretty awesome. Hockey, men's and women's hockey, went out to Wrigley and won a couple big games. Especially big for women's hockey. They got destroyed.
I was going to say, what happened to women's hockey in the game before that, Johnny?
They got destroyed by Wisconsin 5-0 coming out of their break, and I was like, "Oh God, that's not good." And then Johnny's
going to hear about it.
I know. And then But then they come back and they won a shootout at Wrigley out in the, in the environment. And men's hockey came back against Michigan, right? They were coming back and winning games.
I have to imagine that Wrigley series was a financial flop. It looked like nobody was there. And I heard the conditions of the ice were like miserable at the, can we stop playing hockey games outdoors?
No,
unless we're in like Manitoba, unless we're in Manitoba in the heart of winter. Or like that part of Canada and Hatchet where like the trees are freezing and exploding because the sap is expanding and the bark isn't moving. I don't want to see any outdoor hockey game ever, period.
No, well, unfortunately, you're going to be seeing it because it's going to be happening again here on March 1st. So that'll be fun.
Gross.
Last thing. So Will Howard, there was a little, I put this in the social reactions post. Will Howard was trying to get up on the podium on the big stage that they set up in the post game for the Rose Bowl, and this guy who looked like the dude from the Michael Jordan documentary, who was like when they were like you know what I'm talking about, when they were like betting on stuff.
He looked older than that, but I know
what the guy with the
mean.
mustache and kind of the big hair.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, "No, sir, no." And he wouldn't let Will Howard up on there. And I guess it was a weight thing. And my question is, if you were like a lineman or somebody already on the would you have given up your spot to Will Howard?
Well, Tyleek was right there watching the whole thing, and he just thought it was kind of funny.
I thought
he didn't come down to do it.
But I'm saying, would you have done that? Would you have said, no, Will, you're our quarterback, our leader. You should be up on this stage. Would you?
I think it depends on the kind of game that I had. If I had a game like Tyleek did, where I was like wrecking the interior for most of it,
right.
Even though it maybe didn't necessarily show up in the stat sheet, I'd probably want to have my moment.
But if you're Will Kazmarek, you're like, all right, I'll get down.
Yeah, come on, get off, like.
Now, I think he found his way up on there eventually anyway. I think he kind of like snuck up on the side or something, but that was just a very funny moment.
I'm just surprised he didn't barge his way up there.
He should have. Dude's not going to stop him.
Like, the Will Howard at Kansas State would have just ran over that guy.
Yeah, that's right.
He's just not as aggressive running anymore.
So anyway, that's an extra long Dubcast this week, but you know what? It was worth it because this
totally
was a win
worth it.
It was a win that deserved to be talked more about. So we're glad that you stuck with us. But hey, man, we're coming up on another huge one. This is going to be big. Yeah. So I'm excited about it.
I gotta write up whatever Sark says after the game, good or bad. So I'll have plenty of in-depth thoughts on this upcoming matchup, regardless of the results. So make sure to tune in next week.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
We'll certainly have thoughts.
That's right. So until next time, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you then.
Take care, folks.